What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a production of Youngstown Christian Television. In this program, we seek to integrate the facts of the Bible with the facts that we find in history and see where they interchange with one another and what influence the biblical world had upon the secular world. Now, we've been in the time period that we call ancient times, that is from the beginning of the world up until just before the time of Christ. And as a part of that ancient time period, we have spent several weeks in ancient Egypt, that fascinating area of the world still today. And one of the things that's really remarkable is that you can go to Egypt and see many of the structures that were put into place thousands of years ago. And I recommend that you do that if you're interested. The last time we were looking at the rule of Thutmose IV. Thutmose IV was the successor of Amenhotep II, who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Now, if you missed the previous episodes, let me advise you to go to the website and scroll down to the archives of Discovering His Story and back up at least to ancient Egypt, if not to the very beginning, where we talked about how old the earth is. But Amenhotep II, I believe, fits very much so into the narrative that we have in the book of Exodus and in history as being the Pharaoh of the Exodus. His successor was Thutmose IV. And I started relating to you last time about this dream stela, which is still there in between the legs of the great Sphinx. The god Horus, in whose honor the Sphinx was thought to be made, according to what it says on the dream stela, appeared to a young Thutmose or Thutmosis in a dream while the latter was a mere prince in his father's household. Horus promises Thutmose the throne of Egypt upon the implied condition that he will remove the sand from the Sphinx. Now, it's quite obvious that if Thutmose IV had been the oldest son of his father, Amenhotep II, there would have been no purpose in a divine promise that he should someday become king. That would have been the natural occurrence. It's a necessary inference, therefore, that the oldest son of Amenhotep II must have later predeceased his father, thus leaving the succession to his younger brother. And that being in question, possibly as to who would be the successor, brings into play this dream stela, and so therefore fits very well into the narrative of Exodus, and that we have put forth, integrating that with Egyptian history. Breaking news, at least it is to me. I just discovered something that relates to the plagues of Egypt. See, one of the problems that we often face in criticism from those who don't believe that the accounts given in Exodus are accurate or that these things happened at all is they say that there are no records of it in Egypt. And you can say that about many different things related to what the Bible gives us. Why are there no records of it in those lands? Well, in the first place, there is no ancient civilization that records anything that smacks of a defeat. And sometimes even their defeats are recorded as victories. And so there's no way that an ancient Egyptian historian would have written down the great failure of the Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt in relationship to the plagues brought upon Egypt by the Israelite God Yahweh. Now, there seems to be the possibility, at least, of an exception to that. And that is something that I just discovered recently myself. Maybe you're aware of it. But there is a controversial record of catastrophes coming upon ancient Egypt, which strangely parallels the plagues brought by Yahweh prior to the Exodus, called the Ipuwer Pyresis. And I don't know if I'm saying that correctly or not. That's just, I'm guessing at the pronunciation, as you can see it there on the slide. This papyrus was discovered in the early 1800s. The problem with it is the dating. The year in which it was written is unclear, and it may range anywhere from the 1900s BC to the 1200s BC. If it is in reality older than the most recent estimate, or if it is a copy of an earlier work, then it cannot be an explanation of the Exodus. Although some say that this indicates that the story of the Exodus was copied from this earlier account. But a very interesting evaluation is given by the independent researcher Anne Habermel in her paper, The Ipuwer Papyrus and the Exodus, which you can find online, as she proposes that the papyrus does describe the Exodus. Now, as you can see, there's great similarity between the two reports. Look at this. In the Ipuwer Papyrus, there is a plague throughout the land, blood is everywhere. And on the right, I've placed the accounts in Exodus that relate to this. Next, we see the river is blood. In 210 of the papyrus, men shrink from tasting human beings and thirst after water. And then, that is our water, that is our happiness. What shall we do in respect thereof? All is ruin. And then you move back into 210. Forsooth, gates, columns, and walls are consumed by fire. Forsooth, that has perished which was yesterday seen. The land is left over to its weariness like the cutting of flax. Forsooth, grain has perished on every side. Lower Egypt weeps. Remember, Lower Egypt is that which is to the north. The entire palace is without its revenues. To it belong by right wheat and barley, geese and fish. And then we drop down to the next section. All animals, their hearts weep, cattle moan. Next, behold, cattle are left to stray, and there is none to gather them together. Each man fetches for himself those that are branded with his name. The next section says the land is without light. The next section tells us he who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. It is groaning throughout the land, mingled with lamentations. Forsooth, the children of princes are dashed against the walls. Forsooth, the children of princes are cast out in the streets. The next section tells us, behold, the fire has mounted up on high. Its burning goes forth against the enemies of the land. And then lastly, gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze are fastened on the neck of female slaves. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a really good representation of what occurred during the plagues on Egypt. It's hard to imagine that these things would have occurred at another time in the history of Egypt, with no record anywhere else of such a dire circumstantial event. And yet here they are. Now, whether this is actually an account of the plagues, I can't say for certain, but it sure raises a lot of possibilities. And now, back to our regular program. I hope you found that interruption interesting. I try to bring you the latest research that I've come up with, and although there may be a lot of things that I don't know, when I find it out, I try to relate that to my listeners and my audience. We were talking about Thutmose IV. The next person that comes after him is Amenhotep III. And during his reign, we have a topographical list that is in the year 1386 BC. And this is located in the Temple of Amun in present or ancient Nubia. And it's from this time period. In one column is written some letters that mean Yahweh of the land of the Shasu. You can see it there. Yahweh of the land of the Shasu. In the ancient Near East, a divine name was also given to geographical places where the god was worshipped. And so this is given. And the importance of it is that this is the first clear extra-biblical reference of the name Yahweh. So we have an account here, a listing here that tells us that Yahweh, in fact, was recognized in Egypt during the reign of Amenhotep III as being the god of the land of the Shasu, which often is used of the people living in the land of Canaan and thereabouts. Now I'm going to go through some other pharaohs as we go along here, and you're going to wonder, why is he telling us about all these pharaohs? But it's only to give you an historical context, and so that you can see the progression of things in Egypt as it relates to the children of Israel as they're going now to the Promised Land, and also to demonstrate from extra-biblical sources what Egyptians knew about the Hebrew people and their God Yahweh. So following Amenhotep III, the next pharaoh is Amenhotep IV, named after his dad. Remember that Amenhotep means Amen is pleased. Remember Amen, who was the god that possibly was brought to Egypt through Abraham, as he told Pharaoh about worshiping the one true God, Amen. And so we find it over and over again in the Egyptian pharaoh names. So we have Amenhotep IV. Now, he is well known by another name, and that is Akhenaten. And we'll talk about that in a moment. He actually was co-regent of Amenhotep III, but interestingly, he's never mentioned until he actually becomes king. He changed three pillars of Egyptian society. First of all, religion. Akhenaten was a religious visionary because he was departing from the normal Egyptian viewpoints of religion. He's known as the heretical king of Amarna because he attempted to bring all gods under the authority of Ra, or Aten, from whom he took his name, Akhenaten. And this is versus the god Amen. So it may get a little confusing here, but it appears that Akhenaten, although he's becoming monotheistic, and Christians might look at that and say, oh, yay for monotheism. Maybe Akhenaten is following the one true God. But if we remember that the name Amen possibly comes from the one true God, then Akhenaten is really rebelling against him. It's difficult to say for certain in looking back. But his worship of Aten never penetrated to the masses of Egypt. And so religious civil war ensued. The second pillar of Egyptian society occurred when he moved the capital from Thebes to Amarna. Aten, the god Aten, showed Akhenaten where to build the city. And so he built it, and he said he would never leave the city, and he didn't. He stayed within the confines of that city his entire life, worshiping the god Aten and alienating the rest of Egypt against him. The third pillar of society that he changed was the military. divine order, according to their customs, placed Egypt on top of all other nations. But Akhenaten had no interest in conquering other nations, and so the military declined. During this time period, the authority of priests, officials, and soldiers were growing, although Akhenaten's control over the military was declining. Now, in 1887, an Egyptian peasant woman discovered a collection of cuneiform tablets at the site of Akhenaten's capital from the 14th century BC. There were a total of 377 tablets found. Later, some more tablets were found. About half of them were written in Akkadian by Canaanite scribes in what we call Palestine, or the Levant, describing the conditions there. One major problem that they pointed out to Akhenaten was a people called the Hapiru, who were taking over the land. They wanted the king of Egypt to send reinforcements. Hapiru is probably related to the word Hebrew. Hapiru, which is an Akkadian word, is sometimes spelled Habiru or Apiru in Egyptian. In these letters, Hapiru is spelled with the Sumerian letters. Hapiru for them was a general term for robber, or more importantly, migrant. The El Amarna, that is these Amarna tablets, one of them says, "Now the Hapiru are prevailing over us. So may the king, my lord, take me away from the land of the Hapiru, so that the Hapiru will not destroy us." In another place it says, "May the king, my lord, be informed that war is waged in the land, and that the land of the king, my lord, is being ruined by going over to the Hapiru." Now, again, we can't be certain that the people that are being talked about here in these letters are the Hebrews, but it certainly matches up with the time frame as well as the letters used in describing them. This would have been the time when the children of Israel, the Hebrew people, were moving into the promised land, to the land of Canaan, and were in fact destroying cities and taking over the land. And so you can understand the angst of the Canaanites, who were under Egyptian rule, to try to appeal to Egypt to come and help them. But with the loss of so much of their military through the miracle of the Red Sea and the neglect of Akhenaten, they were in no position to lend assistance. So we have an idea of what was taking place under the rulership of Akhenaten. And here's a picture of some of the tablets of the Amarna letters. One of the things that Akhenaten is known for is also the fact that he was married to what is arguably one of the most beautiful women, certainly of the ancient world, some would say even of history, the beautiful Queen Nefertiti. And as you look at this sculpture, you may be in agreement with that assessment. Now, you might be of the opinion that I'm sure that was doctored up. You know, like my wife is fond of looking at pictures of celebrities without makeup and telling me how plain they look, and even sometimes ugly without their makeup. And we do know that statues were created of the rulers of Egypt in such a way as to make them look beautiful. And many of the pharaohs look like they're going to the gym every day. But it's interesting, under the rule of Akhenaten, that he changed that. He changed the art so that statues were, from his point, at his time period, made to portray the actual person in reality. deformities and all. And so we may be able to say with some degree of certainty that this particular portrait of Nefertiti may be accurate. We see another here in this statue of the two of them together. And you can see that Amenhotep IV, or Akhenaten, does not look like he goes to the gym every day. He's got a little bit of that middle-aged spread, and Nefertiti still looks pretty good. In fact, it's interesting, there's technology now that I've seen employed in different people, and here's the technology in which they take a statue, a portrait of some kind, and then project it into what that person would look like today. And so here's how Nefertiti would look. I would say, yeah, she was a beautiful woman. Now, following Akhenaten, we have another pharaoh, and we don't know exactly, let me go back here, exactly the relationship. It is thought that Semenkhare, excuse the pronunciation, was a son-in-law of Amenophes or Amenhotep IV. And then he is followed by someone that you've all heard of, and that is King Tutankhamun, or King Tut. Whoops, I went too far. King Tut was either a son or son-in-law of Amenhotep IV. He was married to the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, but that doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't Akhenaten's son. If you've been on previous episodes, you know that that's the case. He began ruling at the age of 10. So it seems that he would have been born rather late in life to Akhenaten. And he died at the age of 19. What he did is of importance, besides leaving a lot of treasure for us to find, was that he restored the old forms of worship. So he went against his predecessor, worshiping only Aten, and came back to what might be termed the polytheistic system that Egypt had been in for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Now, the unfortunate thing about King Tut is, at least for him and his family, is he died at the age of 19, leaving his widow to confront the aggression of the Hittites up in the north. We'll say more about them. In order to restrain incursion into Egyptian holdings and to solidify her power at home, she wrote to, try to say this name, Shupalululiuma. I'm only going to say it once. He was the king of the Hittites. She wrote this: "My husband is dead, and I have no son. I am told that you have many sons. If you send me one of your sons, he could become my husband. I do not wish to take one of my servants and make a husband of him." Well, thinking that this might be some kind of a ruse, the king sent his chamberlain to ascertain if there was indeed no prince in Egypt. When she learned of the doubts of the Hittite king, Anchises, we'll give her that nickname, dispatched another letter admonishing Shup, I think we'll call him, for disbelieving her, relating that no one would humiliate themselves as she had if it were not so that she needed a king to rule alongside her. She also pointed out that she had contacted no other nation, and once again related that Shup had many sons, one of whom could be her husband and king over the land of Egypt. Well, that sounded like a pretty good deal. And so Shup sent her the son she asked for. Unfortunately, he was murdered on the way. So much for that alliance. And so we look now at the Pharaoh's family tree, looking back at Akhenaten and Nefertiti. We see King Tut. We see a couple of others that have reigned there. And now we're going to move into another dynasty, the 19th dynasty. But before we get entirely to that 19th dynasty, which starts out with Ramses the First, and then we come to Seti, and to then Ramses the Great, we have to fill in the space in between. And we find that really the first pharaoh that rules after King Tut is it's spelled A-Y. We know very little of him, and it is thought that possibly he may have been involved in the assassination of King Tut. James Patterson is known for his mystery novels, has written a very important and interesting novel, historical novel, let's call it, a well-researched history of the murder of King Tut, in which case he takes the what is known from history of King Tut, throws in his speculations from his mind of mystery, trying to solve the mystery of King Tut, and then also tells us of Howard Carter, who is the one who discovered the tombs of King Tut. Very interesting reading. I highly recommend that book. According to his evaluation, this was a general who was involved in the assassination of King Tut. He did not reign very long, and the kingdom was then taken over by Horemheb, who also may have been involved in the plot. And he is considered as a possible first ruler of the 19th dynasty. Certainly he is of a different family. It's during his reign that we have this tale of two brothers that appears in the written record, and it tells a story similar to Joseph and Potiphar's wife. In this story, a young man is falsely accused of proposing adultery with his elder brother's wife. And so it has some similarities, may even be based upon the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. We don't know. Following Horemheb comes Ramses the First, who was a renowned general, and then Seti the First, who takes a campaign into the northern Levant, or what we call Palestine, during his reign, which lasts a pretty good length of time. Now, at this point, we come to what is arguably the last powerful pharaoh in Egyptian history, and the one who is claimed by most television shows and movies to be the Pharaoh of the Exodus, which I hope we've proved by now he was not, and that is Ramses II. You can see where he appears on the family tree here. He may be related to those before him, but he is definitely in a different dynasty, considered to be a different family than they are. Ramses the Great, there's much to say about him, and so we're going to wait until we have more time to spend to look at him. Ramses the Great is called that for a reason. You know, most rulers that have the appellation the Great, it's not because they were such a great person themselves, but it's because they were great builders. And Ramses II, we're going to see next time, was a builder of great things. And so that's how he comes to have that name. And we'll examine the life and structures next time on Discovering His Story of Ramses II, or Ramses the Great. Remember, you can always go to the website and look at past episodes under the archives of Discovering His Story. And keep watching not only this program, but others on Youngstown Christian Television. See you next time.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the earth and our universe is really his story.